fights to tell and live. And in that bell.
Remember when MTV actually played music videos? In the golden age of metal, your screen was flooded with leather, explosions, and screaming frontmen. But for every video you saw 100 times, there was another one that played once at 3 in the morning and then vanished forever. These are 16 mind-blowing heavy metal bands you forgot existed. 1. Grim Reaper. First up is a band with a name that's hard to forget, even if the band itself has faded from memory for many. We're talking about Grim Reaper. Hailing from England, this band was part of the new wave of British heavy metal, a huge movement in the early 82nd. Their secret weapon was their singer, Steve Grimmett. This guy had a voice that was just unbelievable. He could hit high notes that would make other singers jealous, and he did it with so much power and control. Truth be told, their whole sound was built around those amazing vocals. They got a record deal and released a few albums, with titles like See You in Hell and Fear No Evil. Their videos even got some airtime on MTV back in the day. You might remember the video for See You in Hell where the band is playing in a cage while a bunch of fans headbang outside. It was simple, it was cheesy, and it was pure 80-second metal. They had all the pieces to make it big, but legal problems with their record label stopped them in their tracks. The band fell apart, and Steve Grimmett went on to sing in other bands. But the awesome power of Grim Reaper was lost for many years. But as powerful as Grim Reaper's vocals were, our next band took the speed and intensity to a whole new level, creating a sound so fast and frantic, they had to invent a new name for it. 2. Raven. If Grim Reaper had the soaring vocals, our next band, Raven, had the pure, unfiltered energy. This band, also from England, was made up of 2 brothers, John and Mark Gallagher, and a drummer. They were one of the first bands to play at a blistering speed. They were so wild and energetic on stage that they called their music athletic rock. The guys would literally run around, jump off their amps, and never stop moving, all while playing incredibly fast and tight heavy metal. Get this, they were so ahead of their time that they took a young, unknown band called Metallica on their very first major tour. Can you imagine that? Raven was the headliner, and the future biggest metal band in the world was their opening act. Raven had a bunch of classic albums in the early 82nd like Rock Until You Drop and Wiped Out. Their music was a high-speed collision of heavy riffs, crazy bass lines, and wild drumming. They were influential and respected by all their peers. So what happened? Well, they signed with a major American record label that tried to change their sound to make it more radio-friendly. They added horns and keyboards and tried to make Raven into something they weren't. The fans didn't like it, and the band lost all the momentum they had built. They were true pioneers of speed metal, but a bad decision sent them back to the underground. Raven brought the speed, but our next band brought something much darker and slower, a sound so heavy and gloomy it felt like it was moving mountains, and would later be called doom metal. 3. Trouble. After all that speed from Raven, let's slow things down. Way down. Meet Trouble, a band from Chicago with a sound that was completely different from most other metal bands at the time. While everyone else was trying to play faster and faster, Trouble took their inspiration from the early heavy sounds of Black Sabbath. Their music was thick, heavy, and sludgy, with huge, powerful guitar riffs that felt like they could shake the ground. This style became known as doom metal, and Trouble were one of its founding fathers. Here's the thing that made them even more unique. In a genre often filled with dark and spooky themes, Trouble's lyrics were different. The band members had strong Christian beliefs, and they wrote about their faith, struggles, and spirituality. Because of this, some people started calling their music white metal to contrast it with the black metal scene. They released a string of incredible albums in the 82nd, like Psalm 9 and The Skull, that are considered absolute classics by fans of the genre. They had the respect of critics and a dedicated fan base, but they never achieved the massive commercial success of their peers. Maybe their sound was too heavy for the mainstream, or maybe the spiritual lyrics confused people. Whatever the reason, Trouble remains one of the most respected and influential bands in the doom metal scene, a true heavy metal treasure that most people have never heard of. While Trouble looked to the heavens for inspiration, the next band on our list looked straight into the pages of epic fantasy books, creating a whole world of swords and sorcery with their music. 4. Cirith Ungol. Get ready to enter a world of fantasy and magic, because our next band is Cirith Ungol, pronounced Cirith Ungol. If you're a fan of The Lord of the Rings, you might recognize that name. It's a place in Mordor, and that tells you everything you need to know about this band's vibe. They were from California, but their music sounded like it came from another dimension. Their sound was raw, epic, and totally unique. It wasn't as fast as thrash or as slow as doom. It was just its own weird, wonderful thing. The band was obsessed with sword and sorcery fantasy stories, and it showed in everything they did. Their lyrics were all about magic, warriors, ancient gods, and epic battles. Their album covers were just as important as the music. They used amazing fantasy paintings from the artist Michael Whelan, featuring characters like the warrior Elric of Melniboné. These covers were so cool they made you want to buy the album without even hearing it. The singer, Tim Baker, had a voice that you either loved or hated. It was a raw, raspy wail that was full of passion and sounded like a warrior crying out on a battlefield. Truth be told, they were probably too strange for the mainstream. Their sound was unconventional, and they never fit neatly into any category. They broke up in the early 92nd, feeling defeated by the music industry. But here's the cool part. Their legend only grew over time. A huge cult following developed around the world, and decades later, the band got back together to play for massive crowds of fans who had discovered their epic music. Fantasy was cool, but the next band on our list lived a real-life story so crazy and so inspiring it became the subject of an award-winning movie, a story of pure determination against all odds. 5. Anvil. Some bands are forgotten because their sound was too strange. Others are forgotten because of bad luck. Anvil is a band that experienced all of that and more. These guys from Canada were right there at the beginning of the speed metal scene in the early 82nd. Their album Metal on Metal is a stone-cold classic, and its title track is an anthem that other bands still talk about with respect. They had the power, the speed, and the talent. They even influenced a lot of the bands that became huge superstars, like Metallica and Anthrax. So why aren't they a household name? That's the million-dollar question. It all comes down to a mix of terrible management, bad decisions, and just plain old bad luck. While all the bands they inspired went on to sell millions of records, Anvil was stuck playing in small clubs and working regular day jobs to support their families. For decades, they just kept going, refusing to give up on their dream no matter how hard things got. They were the ultimate underdogs of heavy metal. Here's where the story gets mind-blowing. In 2008, a documentary called Anvil. The Story of Anvil was released. The movie told their story with so much heart and honesty that it became a huge hit. It showed their struggles, their friendship, and their unbreakable spirit. People who had never even heard of heavy metal fell in love with these guys. The movie made them famous overnight, decades after their peak. It's a comeback story unlike any other in music history. Anvil fought for decades to be heard, but our next band had a powerhouse voice from the very beginning, led by a woman who could wail with the best of them and became a true queen of metal. 6. Warlock. In the 82nd, heavy metal was mostly a boys' club. Most bands were made up of all men, but that started to change thanks to pioneers like our next entry. Let's talk about the German band Warlock. Warlock played powerful, catchy, and classic heavy metal, with great guitar riffs and big sing-along choruses. They had everything a great 82nd metal band needed, but they also had a secret weapon that made them stand out, their lead singer Doro Pesch. Doro wasn't just a singer, she was a force of nature. She had a powerful, gritty voice that could be both tough and melodic. She quickly became one of the most iconic and beloved women in heavy metal, earning the title the Metal Queen. Warlock became very popular in Europe, and even started to make a name for themselves in America. Their song All We Are became a huge metal anthem, and its music video was played a lot on MTV. They were on the verge of becoming massive stars. But then, disaster struck. After releasing their most successful album, the band got into a huge legal fight with their former manager. The manager ended up owning the rights to the band's name, Warlock. This meant that Doro could no longer use the name of her own band. It was a devastating blow. Instead of giving up, she decided to continue her career under her own name, Doro. She's had a long and successful career, but that legal issue completely stopped Warlock's momentum right when they were about to take over the world. Doro proved a woman could front a powerful metal band, but our next group from Japan showed that an entire band of women could absolutely shred and blow minds all across the ocean. 7. Loudness. Heavy metal was a global phenomenon, but for a long time, it was dominated by bands from America and England. It was really hard for bands from other countries to break through, especially if they didn't speak English. That's what makes the story of Loudness so amazing. This band from Japan was formed in the early 82nd, and they were determined to take on the world. And they had the talent to do it. Their guitarist, Akira Takasaki, pronounced Akira Takasaki, was a true guitar hero. He was a technical wizard who could play with incredible speed, precision, and creativity. People compared him to legends like Eddie Van Halen. The band's sound was a mix of classic heavy metal and incredible musicianship. They became huge stars in Japan. And then they set their sights on America. Believe it or not, they succeeded. In 1985, Loudness became the first Japanese heavy metal band to sign a major record deal in the United States. Their album Thunder in the East was a hit. The music video for their song Crazy Nights was all over MTV. It showed the band with their wild hair and flashy outfits, rocking out in front of an American audience. For a moment, it seemed like they were going to be the next big thing, but it was hard to keep that momentum going. Their singer struggled with singing in English, and later albums didn't connect as well with American audiences. They remain legends in Japan, but in America, they're a forgotten piece of metal history. Loudness brought technical skill from Japan, but our next band brought pure, raw, spooky energy from England, a sound that helped kickstart that whole new wave of British heavy metal we mentioned earlier. 8. Angel Witch. Let's head back to England for a band that was right there in the thick of the new wave of British heavy metal. The band is called Angel Witch, and they are one of the most classic examples of a band that had all the right ingredients, but could never quite bake the cake. They formed in the late 72nd and quickly got a reputation for their unique sound. It was a mix of heavy Black Sabbath-style riffs, the speed of punk rock, and a spooky occult vibe. Their self-titled debut album from 1980 is considered by many to be one of the greatest and most important metal albums of all time. The opening track, also called Angel Witch, is a perfect heavy metal song. It has a killer riff, a catchy chorus, and a dark, mystical feel. The band was led by a guitarist and singer named Kevin Hayborn. He was the creative force behind the music and the band's signature sound. They had the songs, the image, and they were part of a huge new music scene. So what went wrong? Long story short, they just couldn't keep a stable lineup. Band members were constantly quitting or getting fired. The band would break up, then get back together with new members, then break up again. This constant chaos made it impossible to build on the success of their first album. They released other albums over the years, but they never recaptured that early magic. Angel Witch is a classic case of a band whose potential was wasted because of internal problems. Angel Witch flirted with dark themes, but the next band on our list dove headfirst into shocking theatrics that made parents and politicians absolutely furious. 9WASP. Now we come to a band that was impossible to ignore in the 82nd. A band that was loud, obnoxious, and determined to shock you. We are talking about Wasp, pronounced Wasp. Hailing from Los Angeles, This band was led by the imposing and charismatic frontman Blackie Lawless. They exploded onto the scene with a brand of heavy metal that was raw, aggressive, and paired with one of the most outrageous stage shows ever seen. These guys were the masters of shock rock. Their concerts were wild spectacles. Blackie Lawless had a microphone stand made of chains and a skull, and he wore a codpiece that shot sparks. The band's theatrics were designed to be as provocative as possible, and it worked. They quickly got a reputation for being one of the most dangerous bands in rock and roll. Parent groups and politicians were outraged by their lyrics and their stage antics, which only made kids love them more. Beneath all the shock, however, they wrote some amazing anthemic heavy metal songs, tracks like I Wanna Be Somebody and Love. Machine were huge hits that captured the rebellious spirit of the era. They had a string of successful albums and were all over MTV and rock radio. But as the 82nd ended, their style of shock rock started to seem a little dated. The band continued, and Blackie Lawless even started writing more serious, concept-driven albums, but they never again reached that same level of massive, controversial fame they had in their early days. Wasp used shock to get attention, but the next band didn't need any gimmicks, just incredibly complex and beautiful music, and a story that was filled with both tragedy and triumph. 10. Savatage. Let's journey to Florida for a band that was truly special, a band that was always changing and evolving, and that created music with incredible depth and emotion. The band is Savatage, pronounced Savatage. At the heart of the band were two brothers, John and Chris Oliva. John was the singer and keyboardist, with a unique, powerful voice that was full of raw emotion. Chris was the guitarist, and he was a true genius on the instrument. His guitar solos were not just fast, they were beautiful, melodic, and told a story. In their early days, Savatage played a style of powerful, traditional heavy metal, but they soon started to grow and experiment. They began to create epic concept albums, which are albums that tell a single story from beginning to end. Their 1987 album Hall of the Mountain King was a masterpiece of theatrical, progressive metal that sounded like a heavy metal Broadway show. They were gaining more and more fans and were respected by everyone for their incredible musicianship. But then, the ultimate tragedy happened. In 1993, Chris Oliva was lost in a car accident. It was a devastating blow that would have ended most bands, but John Oliva and the rest of the band decided to carry on in his honor. They continued to make music, and their sound became even more theatrical and orchestral. Believe it or not, this continuation of Savatage's musical ideas eventually led the members to form a new project you've almost certainly heard of, the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. That's right, the band that does all that epic Christmas rock music was born from the ashes of Savatage. Savatage created metal operas, but our next band stripped everything down to its angriest, fastest, and funniest core, and they did it all as a side project that was never meant to be serious. 11. SOD Stormtroopers of Death. Sometimes the best things happen when you're not even trying. That's the story of SOD, which stands for Stormtroopers of Death. This wasn't a full-time band. It was a side project started by two members of the famous thrash metal band Anthrax, guitarist Scott Ian and drummer Charlie Benante, along with a former Anthrax member and a singer from another band. They got together just for fun, to play a style of music that was even faster and more aggressive than what they were doing in their main bands. They mixed the speed of thrash metal with the raw energy and short songs of hardcore punk. This new style was called crossover thrash, and SOD were the kings of it. In 1985, they recorded their one and only classic album called Speak English or Die. They supposedly wrote and recorded the entire thing in just a few days. The songs were incredibly short, super fast, and had lyrics that were intentionally silly and made fun of everything and everyone. The band had a mascot, a cartoon skeleton character named Sergeant D, who was on the cover. Here's the wild part. This joke band, and their one album, became massively influential. Tons of other bands copied their sound and their mix of metal and punk. Songs from the album became legendary in the metal community. The band would get together every few years to play a few shows, which were always wild and crazy events. SOD proves that sometimes the most important music is made when you're just messing around and having a good time. SOD was fast and funny, but our next band was dead serious, creating some of the most epic and sorrowful heavy music ever recorded. 12. Candlemass. Let's take a flight over to Sweden for a band that defined an entire subgenre of metal. If Trouble from Chicago helped lay the groundwork for doom metal, then Candlemass built a giant, gloomy castle on top of it. Candlemass took the slow, heavy sound of Black Sabbath and made it even more epic, more dramatic, and more sorrowful. Their style is known as epic doom metal, and they are its undisputed masters. The band was formed by bassist and main songwriter Leif Edling. He had a vision to create the heaviest music in the world. In 1986, they released their debut album, Epicus Doomicus Metallicus. The title alone tells you everything. The music was incredibly slow and heavy, with powerful riffs that created a sense of despair and grandeur. The album became an instant underground classic and basically wrote the rule book for epic doom metal. For their next album, they recruited a new singer named Messiah Markkanen. This guy was a total character. He was a huge man who performed in a monk's robe and had a powerful, booming operatic voice. He looked and sounded like he was leading a heavy metal church service. With Messiah on vocals, the band released several more classic albums and became legends of the doom metal scene. They never had mainstream success, as their music was far too slow and sorrowful for the radio. But for fans of heavy music, Candlemass is royalty. Candlemass showed how powerful slow music could be, but our next band brought back the speed with a singer whose unique screams could practically shatter glass. 13. Metal Church. Heading back to America's West Coast, we find a band that was part of the rising thrash metal scene, but had a sound all their own. The band is Metal Church. They had the speed and aggression of thrash, but also a sense of melody and power that set them apart. They were often called power metal or thrash metal, but they really just sounded like Metal Church. A big part of that unique sound was their original singer, David Wayne. David Wayne had a voice that was one of a kind. He could sing with a gritty, tough guy attitude, and then suddenly unleash a high-pitched scream that was absolutely ferocious. His vocals gave the band a frantic, slightly unhinged energy that was totally captivating. Their self-titled debut album from 1984 is a masterpiece. It's filled with classic tracks like Beyond the Black and a heavy version of the Deep Purple song Highway Star. The album showcased their amazing guitar work and David Wayne's incredible voice. They released another great album with Wayne called The Dark, which was also a big hit in the metal community. But then, lineup changes started to hit the band. David Wayne left and was replaced by a new singer. They continued to release great music, but that constant change in singers made it hard for them to build a consistent identity. Fans would argue about who the real singer of Metal Church was. They are still a beloved and respected band, but those early lineup shifts may have kept them from reaching the top tier of metal stardom. Metal Church had a powerful singer, but our next band had a powerful message, delivering positive and spiritual lyrics in a genre that was often known for its darkness. 14. Stryper. In the world of 82nd heavy metal, with all its talk of parties and dark themes, one band stood out like a ray of light, a very bright, yellow and black ray of light. We're talking about Stryper, pronounced Stryper. This band from California played catchy, melodic heavy metal, also known as glam metal. They had huge, soaring vocals, incredible guitar solos, and choruses so big you could sing along to them instantly. They had everything to be huge, but they also had a gimmick that made them one of the most talked about and controversial bands of their time. Here's the thing, Stryper was an openly Christian band. Their lyrics were all about their faith and delivering a positive message. Their name, they said, stood for salvation through redemption, yielding peace, encouragement, and righteousness. They dressed in wild yellow and black striped outfits, a look they called heavenly metal. And instead of throwing guitar picks into the audience, they would throw small Bibles with their band's logo on them. Believe it or not, this was a recipe for huge success. Their 1986 album To Hell with the Devil was a massive hit, selling millions of copies. Their videos were all over MTV. They were a strange phenomenon, a band that was loved by many metal fans for their great songs, but also made fun of by others for their beliefs. They were also controversial in the Christian community, where many people thought heavy metal was evil. Stryper was a true original, a band that carved out its own unique path and brought a message of hope to the world of heavy metal. Stryper looked to the light, but our next band was pure street-level grit, a bunch of tough guys in armor who sang about fighting for what's yours. 15. Armored Saint. Let's head back to Los Angeles for a band that was all about being real. No fantasy lyrics, no over-the-top shock rock, just honest, powerful, blue-collar heavy metal. The band is Armored Saint. These guys were known for their tough, no-nonsense attitude, and their music reflected that. It was heavy, it was melodic, and it was full of incredible passion, largely thanks to their singer, John Bush. John Bush has one of the greatest voices in all of heavy metal. It's powerful, soulful, and has a gritty edge that sounds incredibly authentic. Here's a mind-blowing piece of rock history for you. Back in the early 82nd, before Metallica had recorded their first album, they were looking for a better singer. They were so impressed with John Bush that they asked him to leave Armored Saint and join Metallica. He turned them down because he was loyal to his friends in his own band. It's one of the biggest what-ifs in metal history. Armored Saint released a string of critically acclaimed albums. They were always respected by fans and other musicians for their integrity and their killer live shows. Their album Symbol of Salvation is considered by many to be a flawless heavy metal masterpiece. Despite all the respect and the great music, they never quite broke through to that next level of superstar fame. They were always the underdog, the working man's metal band. Eventually, John Bush did end up joining another famous band, Anthrax, for many years, but his work with Armored Saint remains some of the best, most heartfelt heavy metal ever made. Armored Saint were true warriors of metal, but our next band sounded like they were leading a charge into a mythical battle, with a name and an image to match. 16. Manowar. We've saved one of the most over-the-top and unapologetic bands for last. If heavy metal is your religion, then Manowar, pronounced Man-O-War, is your church. This band from New York took the idea of epic metal and turned it up to 100. From their very beginning, their mission was to be the purest, loudest, and truest heavy metal band on the planet. Anyone who played what they considered to be false metal, like pop-influenced glam bands, was their enemy. Everything about Manowar is larger than life. Their lyrics are exclusively about mythology, epic battles, glory, honor, and the power of heavy metal itself. Their album covers feature muscular, loincloth-wearing barbarians wielding swords and axes. Their members gave themselves stage names like Joey DeMaio and Eric Adams. They were completely serious about this image, and their fans loved them for it. They weren't just playing a role, they were living it. They even earned a place in the Guinness Book of World Records for performing the loudest concert ever. Their motto is "Death to False Metal," and they have a massive, fiercely loyal global fan base known as the Manowarriors. While they are huge stars in many parts of Europe and South America, they've always been more of a cult band in the United States. Their refusal to ever change or compromise their sound for the mainstream made them heroes to their followers, but kept them from ever getting radio play. They are a perfect example of a band that created its own world and invited fans to come live in it.